pull it up to us, talk right.
We're going to start, because I don't know how many people have left.
A lot.
We have everything from questions that can be answered by a simple yes or no, and I may start with a couple of those. I'm also going to start with the ones I can actually read. And then we'll go perhaps to some of those like what really happened to the twin sisters, as if we know. But Jeff may want to try to handle that one. We'll see.
There she is.
Um,
Don't fall off the back.
Let's start with this one, and I don't know if Jeff is the one who's going to answer this or not. If Michael Strutt is still here, he may have an answer for us. If any human bones of the dead Mexican army are found at the San Jacinto battlefield, what will become of them?
Well, Michael Strutt would be good.
Use the mic, please.
If he's here, but knowing, working with Parks and Wildlife, probably they will contact the Mexican government. The Mexican government might want them back.
Interesting.
But it's unclear because nobody's found any Mexican bones so far, or any bones at all on the battleground that are human.
Was the James Neal commanding at San Jacinto on April 20th the same guy that was commander at Bayer just prior to the siege of February?
Yes.
Yes. I love these short answers. Dr. Krim, what did Rafael Manchola have to do with the law of April 6, 1830?
Rafael Manchola was one of the ones who was very angry at the illegal actions that had been going on, in particular because he was involved with the James Kerr and the DeWitt colony. And he had seen the illegalities, he had seen the problems. He did certainly help to write in 1834 one of the demands to the Mexican government for more authority, but he was also very much opposed to the illegal. As a matter of fact, the first illegal aliens that were coming across the Sabine River.
Mojados con el Sabine. Right? Do you have any knowledge of the relationship between Samuel Herman, New Orleans merchant, and the Mexican government in 1835-36? Ed, that would be for you.
I'm glad you asked that question. Samuel Herman had a part to play in helping Valentin Gomez Farias, the ex-vice president, getting established with providing him funds when he first arrived, I believe, in September 1835 in New Orleans as an exile.
Do you want to say two words about who he was?
He was a merchant. I'm not sure exactly everything that he did. He was one of those men for all seasons, and I think dabbled in just about anything he could get his hands on in terms of developing a portfolio.
Here's a good question. Where was Fort Jessup located in Louisiana?
Yeah, go ahead.
About 35 miles from the Sabine.
35 miles from the Sabine, about halfway up the border of Texas, or a third of the way up the border of Texas? Opposite Nacogdoches. How fast would the shots travel in feet per second from the Mexican cannon fired at the Battle of San Jacinto? I think this has to do with the flash, and I think what you're talking about is the flash that occurs when they light the cannon, rather than the exclamation of the cannon coming out. You don't have much time to duck when you can see that stuff coming out of the barrel, but you will see a flash when the cannon is ignited by the cannoneers, and I believe that's the point of this. But and if anybody, it depends also on the charge and the weight, and I don't think any of us know enough about that to say how many feet per second it was going, and I don't like math questions anyway. That's why I went into history. At the Battle of San Jacinto, Jeff, who were those original officers in the Texan Army who wanted to attack initially, prior to the War Council, or at the War Council?
Well, one was Lysander Wells, who was a major, and I'm trying to remember the other one's name, but I think it was Colonel Bennett, who was in Sherman's. But they were fairly minor officers. The main officers of the line, Millard, Sherman, and Sherman admitted, they weren't averse to fighting. They all wanted to fight, but the question was whether they should wait and wait for the attack or whether they should take the offensive. And only two of the minor officers voted to attack at that time, which was noon on April 21st.
Here's another one for Jeff. Please tell us where the Texas Army crossed the Buffalo Bayou before arriving at San Jacinto. And both Jim Haley and Steve Hardin, who of course clashed here with muskets 3 years ago, got it wrong in their books. They did not cross at Harrisburg. And both of those books, both the biography of Houston and Texian Iliad, have the Texan Army crossing at Harrisburg, and Jeff can set us straight.
Well, the camp was right across the bayou from Harrisburg, but when they decided to cross Buffalo Bayou, they moved a few miles to the east and then crossed over. And the reason they did that is if you look at a map of modern-day Houston, you can see where Harrisburg is, and you see Brays Bayou running into Buffalo Bayou right at Harrisburg, and then a few miles to the east is Sims Bayou running into Buffalo Bayou. If they had crossed at Harrisburg, they would have had to cross Sims Bayou, which was a difficult bayou to cross. And so they knew that, and so they just continued east on the north side of Buffalo Bayou till they passed the mouth of Sims Bayou coming in from the south, and then they crossed over. So that way they didn't have to cross two bayous that day, only just one. There is a marker there. The marker is on Lawndale. It's off of 225, and unfortunately there's a gigantic refinery plant there, so you can't go to the exact site on the bayou. But there's a 1936 Texas Centennial marker on Lawndale in front of the refinery plant. It's just as you cross to the east of Sims Bayou that says that Houston's Army crossed 300 yards north of here, April 19th.
And Jeff, you might just say a word or two about the operation itself from Batterson's farm,
Yes.
right?
Well, the nearby settler was Isaac Batterson, and he had a very unusual circumstances. He was from New York. His wife was really upset about having to live in the boondocks of Texas. And in order to make the situation comfortable for her, he ordered a very fine floor from New York, a wooden floor. And it was shipped down, imported. It was considered to be the finest floor in Texas at the time. And the story is that it's an anecdote, really, that Batterson was at home at the time, and Houston went to him, and he knew Batterson, and he talked to him, and he said, Batterson, I really would like your floor because I need it to cross the Army over. I need a little raft to do that. And Batterson reluctantly gave up the floor. And when they came home after the runaway scrape, the floor was all dirty, but it was propped up against a tree in front of their house, and they cleaned it up, put it back in the house, and for the rest of their lives, whenever anybody visited the Battersons, they would say the entire Army of San Jacinto stepped on this floor, which was true.
Here's one that maybe Bill and Marjorie would want to tackle first. What was the daily ration of the average Texan soldier?
We don't know, but probably not very much. Hardtack.
Well, when they came across some of the houses, there was one that Houston was enjoying a meal, and Rusk, I believe, told him that it was confiscated, or we weren't supposed to be eating that. And he said that he was a co-conspirator in eating it, and he told, was it Sparks? Yeah. Sparks, that he would let him off this time, but don't do that again.
That was the chicken meal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. For Ed Miller, this is an excellent question. What kind of return did the New Orleans investors in the Texas Revolution receive?
Ooh. Yes. I believe, if I'm remembering my statistics correctly, I believe they were looking at 7%. And then I'm honestly, I don't remember. I don't remember that. I know it was a sizable amount. I think it was probably at least 50%. Ultimately, is what they were anticipating, is at least 50 to 75% on the return. They didn't get that.
I should say that the latter part of Ed Miller's book has chapters that go through the horribly complex and horribly botched financial policies of the Texas provisional government, and then the early Texas revolutionary government, and then the constitutional government. And New Orleans is where a lot of this got played out as their rules and regulations for paying off loans, et cetera, took place. Ed, I don't think you'll take this as a complaint or an insult, but it makes your book like the Texas it makes the Texas Revolution, not your book, but the way you look at it from New Orleans makes the Texas Revolution end not with a bang, but a whimper. Caroline, is there a map that delineates the ranches in the Victoria area around 1836?
Yes, if you look in the book, I have several maps that indicate land grant lines. In particular, I have the peninsula that is divided up by Leonardo Manso. He was one of the Mexican developers that brought in a bunch of Mexican settlers and then bought the land from them and sent them back to Mexico. And then, of course, there is the specific land grants that were given, and then after 1836, the changes that were made. So yes, there are in the book. I had to draw them from the General Land Office records and from the county records. So they are as accurate as I can make them.
Buy the book, read it, see the maps. For Jeff Dunn, have you read about or seen any official order confirming General Santa Anna's claim that he requested preferred or seasoned troops to be sent to him as reinforcements at San Jacinto?
Yeah. Well, the order to send Coast back for reinforcements is non-existent. But Fili Sola, when he went back to Mexico and issued his defense of himself, insisted that did not happen. He insisted that he didn't ask for chosen troops, that it was or that it was vague at least. So there's some ambiguity there, and whether they were chosen or not, I really don't think it would have made any difference, frankly, one way or the other. But that was just one excuse that Santa Anna gave as one of the reasons why he felt like he lost the battle.
Caroline, why is Placido Benavides often referred to as the Paul Revere of the Texas Revolution? Were his brothers also involved in the Texas Revolution? And you've answered part of that.
Placido Benavides actually when Grant was captured down in the southern section, south of Lipantitlan by General Urrea, Placido Benavides is the one that makes his escape. And he's the one that notifies Fannin and then rides on to tell Sam Houston that the Mexicans are coming. So he was the one that notified everybody. By the way, on the maps, page 206 is the Eastern Victoria land grants. On page 195 is the land grants that they fought for in the courts. And then on page 131 is the coastal control maps. Oh, and did his brothers fight? No, that was another family that was split over the Texas Revolution. None of the Benavides brothers fought. As a matter of fact, they returned to Texas and remained in Texas in 1836, and they were the ones that paid for all of the taxes that were paid for the De Leon lands that were not lost.
Right, those were his brothers, and you had explained how his brothers-in-law had fought during the Revolution. To Mr. Miller, what do you know about the, quote, French, unquote, soldiers in the group from New Orleans on the expedition to Tampico? I believe that's in your book to a certain extent.
Yes. I also wanted to back up for just a second the question in terms of the projected, what they anticipated would be the...
Anticipated returns
yes,
on the...
150%. Yes.
This is what's called a high-risk venture, this Texas Revolution.
Yes. Little is known about the French soldiers other than Allen, and this is one thing I left out when I discussed Allen, is that one of the groups that he actually had recruited was a group of French cadets and had spent over $600 on uniforms to get the officers and the cadets ready with uniforms to go with him in March of 1836, and then they decided right at the end to refuse to go unless they were paid in advance. So we don't know what happened to them after that.
How many of you would have loaned money at 7% to those guys trying to fight the Texas Revolution? Here are a couple of related questions, one more for Jeff and one more for Ed, in that order. For Jeff, how much did, or for Bill and Marjorie as well, how much did Santa Anna being a Mason affect his treatment by Sam Houston after his capture? And a related question for Ed, can you comment on the role of Freemasonry in New Orleans per the Texas Revolution? So let's start with whether there's a secret hand signal given.
As a Mason, I'd say it was a grand hailing sign of distress, which he performed, and reportedly he did get some reaction from the Masons in the Texas side.
Can you hear? No, you really need to have that close.
Well, I said it's the grand hailing sign of distress, and he had given it, and it had an effect on a number of Masons on the Texas side, even though they were in favor of cutting his throat. But it did have a definite effect.
So they wanted to cut his throat gently?
Matter of fact, a surprising number of the leaders in the Texas Revolution weren't Masons.
And Ed, the question on the role of Freemasonry in New Orleans with regard to the Texas Revolution.
One of the professors that I studied was Alan Hutchison, who actually dealt quite a bit in terms of secret meetings that took place in September 1835 that were, as he put it, Masonic in nature. And I discovered that those meetings, they may have had Masons there, they may have had merchants who were Masons, but from what I found, that was not a secret meeting place for Masons. And so I found that perhaps there might have been a network of fellow Masons that may have known each other from various fraternal lodges in the New Orleans area that ended up in Texas. But as far as any grand conspiracy on the part of the Louisiana Grand Lodge, I could not find it.
Jeff, this is one for you. In the book on the Texas Navy by Jim Dan Hill, he tells of Santa Anna at New Washington negotiating with a German ship captain to take him back to Mexico. A Texas Navy vessel then interrupted their negotiation, and Santa Anna went to San Jacinto to lose the battle. Did this actually happen?
I don't think so. There was an interesting incident that happened at New Washington that really is somewhat garbled in the accounts. Santa Anna, in his account, references the fact that he saw a boat in distress outside of in San Jacinto Bay, and he saw another steamboat come up and set it on fire. And that really did happen. That was the Cayuga steamboat that was coming up to rescue a stranded schooner that had runaway people in the runaway scrape on that schooner. The schooner got caught in what's called Clopper's Bar, which was between the edge of the peninsula and the other side of the San Jacinto River. And they panicked. They didn't know what to do because they couldn't get the schooner off the bar. And meanwhile, they could look over not too far away and see the Mexican soldiers at New Washington looking at them. So the Cayuga steamboat was able to get away and take most of the women and most of the men. They left 17 men on that schooner to try to get that schooner off. But meanwhile, the Cayuga went to Anahuac, dropped everybody else off, and came back. And when it became apparent they couldn't get the schooner off, those 17 men jumped on board the Cayuga, and the Cayuga set it on fire, so the Mexicans couldn't get it. For some reason, it's been interpreted as a German schooner, and there really is no evidence of that at all. These were both Texan vessels that occurred. It's a very interesting incident that happened right when Santa Anna was right there watching this whole thing, because he does have a brief mention of it in his memoirs.
Two for Dr. Krim. First one is, please discuss the importance of the Republic of the Rio Grande in proving that the Texas Revolution was not a racist revolution. In 25 words or less.
Holy moly. The Republic of the Rio Grande, and especially the involvement there, that's a whole nother ball of wax that's got to be studied, and somebody's going to have to do a really, really in-depth study, because this is Santiago Vidaury, who was the governor of the, and he was very much involved. Santiago Vidaury was involved. Jose Maria Jesus Carbajal was involved. There was a lot of politicking going on in that northern region, and it was an attempt to try to establish a federalist government in the northern parts of Mexico. In other words, what Carbajal, perhaps not so much Vidaury, who was more of a, he just made profit where he could, but these two men were trying to create something that Santa Anna had destroyed, they felt, when he destroyed the 1824 Constitution. And so they were trying to reestablish something that would have responded to the 1824 Constitution. I don't know about the racist issue.
I will just
I'm not
comment
sure.
that certainly there were discussions between the representatives of the Republic of the Rio Grande and the Texas Republic. Bill, go ahead.
Colonel Kinney, the founder of Corpus Christi, had a great fair to help finance it, so he was very deeply involved in that movement.
But one other thing is that because some people from Texas who had gone down to fight in those Federalist wars felt betrayed by Canales, is that the right one? And felt that they had been hung out to dry when the Federalist and Centralist settled their differences, they brought back a great deal of resentment to Texas, and brought that resentment back in the years that were turning kind of sour, and that turned really sour for relations between Anglos and Tejanos in 1842. So there may have been some resentments that were built up from some of those experiences that some Texans had in the Republic of the Rio Grande. Hobart Hughson wrote an unpublished manuscript called Iron Men about it's never been published, about the experiences of Texans in the Federalist Wars.
Part of the question of the racism, actually Anglos on the American side were very much in support of the Federalist ideals, and they gave money to Carbajal and supported, and certainly this was extended on into the 1850s, but there was a lot of cross-border movement during this period. So as far as, actually there was probably very little racism between those pro-Federalists on both sides. Now the anti-Federalists, then certainly you can play the racism card.
One more thing, I know that you put a note in the beginning of your book about who you call what words you give to people, and we have a note from someone who wants us to call the people born in Texas Tejanos, and the people maybe from south of the Rio Grande or the Nueces Mexicans. I don't know, it doesn't say anything about the people who were Anglo, who were born in Texas, but those born in America, the United States of America, not to be called Americans, but actually called United Statesians. And as you mentioned,
This is always a problem.
and as you mentioned, there was resentment on the part of people for those Americans who took the name of a continent rather than their country and gave it to themselves. It is honored by usage, I'm afraid. Could you give us very briefly the names of a few other Tejano families that were divided by the Texas Revolution, and comment on the sources for reading about those people?
Well, there's very little that has been done yet, but certainly there is a lot of interest developing in this. And, well, as I said, the Benavides family was split, the Aldrete family was split, the Moya family was split. Some of the De la Garzas, Carlos de la Garza was a perfect example of one of the ones who supported, not only supported, but fought for General Urrea. He actually led the Victoriana Guardias for General Urrea. And it was obvious that he would have, because his father was a soldier, his grandfather had been a soldier. He certainly believed in respecting the authoritarian government. And so the De la Garzas, and of course there are hundreds of different De la Garzas, but they were all split, and there was a lot of antagonism. It was a civil war. It was just like the Civil War in the United States, and the hatreds that are built up over this are things that were very hard to get over at the end of the war.
Although there is a good bit of truth to the point that Timothy Matovina made in his study of Tejano accounts of the Alamo, and that is that for most Tejano families, blood was thicker than water. And the family and staying in Texas, for many, was more important than what side you fought on in the Revolution. And certainly for Carlos de la Garza, that was true. Here's an interesting one. I saw a collection of palm-sized round metal balls that supposedly came off the San Jacinto battleground in the early 1900s before it was made a state site. What are these? Some are split in half. Jeff, is this canister shot?
Who knows?
Jeff doesn't know.
Look at them to see.
Yeah, it's rough to palm size, meaning a ball is about as big around as your hand. That's pretty big. That's too big for the canister shot that I've seen. Ed, please explain the Mexican law passed after the New Orleans troops were captured and executed before Santa Anna came to Texas. Well, they were executed after Santa Anna came to Texas, but I guess the law we're talking about is probably the Tornel Decree.
Oh, yes.
And does that have any relation to what's going on in New Orleans?
Well, the Tornel decree was basically a warning to Americans not to tread upon Mexican soil with the intent of being an adventurer or a pirate, as they would call them, and warning them that if they did, as in the case of the Grays, that they would be rounded up and
treated as
executed.
pirates.
Yes, yeah. Treated as pirates.
Were the military officer titles of the Texas Revolution revolutionary principles, in other words, colonel, general, as in Travis and Houston, derived from formal positions in the U.S. Army or given to these men in Texas? And it's clear that both of those got their titles in Texas, not in the United States. Travis had never been a colonel, nor Houston a general in the United States. One last, two last ones, and I hope I've gotten them all, except the one, telling me that I ought to quit North Carolina and come to Texas. I appreciate the thought, but if you'll endow a chair, it'll make it a lot easier. Someone who's descended from Prussians, like my man Hermann Ehrenberg, said that one of her ancestors described the New Orleans coffee houses as places where men met to drink things a lot stronger than coffee and make deals. Was Brainerd's Coffee House one of these special places?
Yes.
We have another thing requesting clarification of the amount of money that gets paid here. This is one I'm going to leave up here for Jan DeVault, and if she wants to touch it with a 10-foot pole, she can. And our last question, I think, and I apologize to anyone whose question has not been asked, but it was inadvertence. Jeff, whatever happened to the Twin Sisters Cannon after the Battle of San Jacinto?
The Twin Sisters is the Texas equivalent of the Holy Grail. It's probably the most recognizable artifact that's never been found, but yet people have always been trying to find it. And Lynn Ashby in the Houston Post in the 1970s probably made the last big public effort to try to find them and offered this Cash Award and in his column during that time tried to drum up some support, some interest in trying to locate him. And of course, no one ever did. There are several stories about the last sightings of the twin sisters. The most reliable seemed to be from 1865, right after the Civil War, where they were found supposedly at Harrisburg by a returning Confederate soldier. And he noticed inscriptions on them that identified them as being from Cincinnati from 1836, recognized the historical significance of them, didn't want the Yankees to get them, so he and a couple of friends buried them near Harrisburg, he says. Unfortunately, when he went back 20 years later to try to find them, he couldn't figure out where he buried them and never was able to uncover them, and it really bothered him for quite the rest of his life because he couldn't figure it out. But that's considered to be one of the more reliable versions of what may have happened to them. So they may be buried somewhere in the Harrisburg area.
Greg Dimmick has a metal detecting job for himself. I just looked in the fish bowl and found one that was remaining. Where were the civilians of the runaway scrape during the Battle of San Jacinto? And my answer would be all over the map, but these guys may have a better answer than that.
Yeah. No, I think that's correct. They were, a lot of them were on the Trinity River. A lot of them were north in maybe Montgomery County, what's now Montgomery County, in that area. And some of them actually made it to the Sabine. But there really weren't any in the immediate vicinity of the battleground.
Excellent point that Bill made, and one that's brought out, I think, Ed, maybe in your book and certainly in some others I've read recently, and that is that Fort Jessup is not where the men were who were ready to hop into Texas. They were at Camp Sabine, which was down on the Sabine River. And those men were aware of the orders that President Jackson had issued, which had already authorized United States troops to go as far as Nacogdoches and to the Neches. I have a question. I'm going to take executive privilege, I guess, and ask the last question. As Ed Miller points out in his book, General Edmund P. Gaines, who was the commander at Fort Jessup, was not at Fort Jessup during a very critical time of the Texas Revolution. He was in Florida dealing with the Seminole War, and I think he only got back, March 28th? Or that's correct. He was in New Orleans by the 28th, and in Texas later than that. Who was, going back to Bill and Marjorie on this one, who was in charge of Fort Jessup when Gaines was gone? He would have been the guy there allowing these men to leave and not throwing them in the guardhouse and that sort of thing.
I'm sure they were in contact with Washington.
The answer was, he's sure they're in contact with Washington. I want to see the documents. This is just a remarkably rapt group out there. I don't see anyone taking a siesta. Your attention and enthusiasm is an inspiration to us all. And before Jan gets up to give her final peroration, I just want to say thank you on behalf of myself and all the participants.